The old plane slowly taxied down the runway, preparing for the long flight across the ocean. Clara Johnson, a successful designer, sat in her seat, buckled up and gazing out the window. Next to her, comfortably settled in, her husband Mike was dozing off. They were flying to Tokyo for work, where Clara had important business meetings and new projects awaiting her. Mike had always been reliable and predictable. His stability and calmness were Clara's anchor in the stormy sea of life. But lately, she had been feeling a certain emptiness, as if something important had disappeared from their relationship. They used to spend hours talking, sharing their dreams and plans for the future. But now, their time was increasingly filled with silence and routine. The plane slowly ascended into the air, and Clara felt a slight flutter in her stomach. She had always loved flying, feeling that mix of fear and excitement when the ground fell away beneath her feet. Today, that feeling was especially sharp, perhaps because she knew this flight might be the beginning of something new.
Excuse me.
A voice came from her right. Clara turned her head and saw a man with bright blue eyes and short brown hair, trying to settle into his seat.
Looks like we'll be neighbors for this flight. I'm Jason.
He introduced himself, extending his hand.
Clara.
She replied, shaking his hand. Her hand lingered in his a bit longer than it should have. There was a spark in his eyes that made her heart beat faster.
Hope it's not too cramped for you,
Jason said with a light smile.
These planes are always so uncomfortable.
Yes, that's true.
The flight continued, and Mike soon fell asleep, exhausted from the long preparations for the trip. Clara was left alone with Jason, and they started talking. They talked about work, travel, life. Jason turned out to be a fascinating conversationalist, his stories full of adventures and unexpected twists. At one point, Clara realized she hadn't felt this kind of excitement from a simple conversation in a long time.
Do you ever feel like your life is turning into a routine?
Jason asked, his voice soft and thoughtful.
Yes, I suppose everyone feels that way sometimes.
Clara replied, suddenly realizing that her words reflected more truth than she was ready to admit.
I think people are often afraid of change. But sometimes you need to take a step into the unknown to feel alive.
Clara pondered his words. Maybe this was what she had been missing. The courage to take a step into the unknown. They continued talking, but now there was more between them than just words. There was something secret, forbidden, that was igniting between them, and Clara couldn't ignore it. They exchanged smiles, and Clara felt her heart start to beat faster. The flight continued, and night gradually fell over the plane. The dim cabin lights created a cozy and intimate atmosphere. Mike was still sound asleep, leaning against the window. Clara and Jason kept talking, their conversations becoming increasingly personal and candid. They discussed their work. Clara talked about how she got into architecture, her childhood passion for building something new and creating beautiful spaces. Jason shared his professional experiences, describing projects that inspired him. Their conversation gradually shifted to deeper topics. Clara spoke about her fears and doubts, how her relationship with Mike had become predictable and dull. She felt that something important was missing in her life, something new and exciting. Jason also shared his own struggles. He talked about his failed marriage and how difficult it was to find himself after the divorce. Their conversations were open and honest, and they both felt they could be themselves around each other. The conversation continued, and a special bond formed between them. They talked about their dreams, what inspired them, and what scared them. With each word, they grew closer, and Clara realized she hadn't felt this comfortable and happy talking to someone in a long time. She felt that this conversation was filling her life with new meaning, a new light. There was something exciting in how Jason understood her without words, how their thoughts and feelings intertwined. Their glances became more telling, and Clara realized she hadn't felt this comfortable and happy talking to someone in a long time. She felt that this conversation was filling her life with new meaning, a new light. There was something exciting about how Jason understood her without words, how their thoughts and feelings intertwined. As they continued talking, Jason gradually moved closer to her. At one point, as they laughed at another joke, Jason leaned in closer and his hand landed on her knee. Clara flinched at the unexpected touch, but did not pull away. She felt each pad of his fingers gently touching her skin, sending shivers throughout her body. Jason looked at her, his eyes filled with determination and desire. His index finger was the first to slip under her skirt, where it was warm. Clara bit her lip, her gaze imploring him to continue. Her thoughts were far from innocent despite her innocent look. She glanced around, fearing they might be noticed, but the whole plane seemed to be asleep. Only the soft hum of the engines and the occasional rustle broke the silence. Jason continued to explore her body, his fingers moving further and further, causing a wave of excitement in Clara. Clara closed her eyes, immersing herself in these sensations. Her breathing became irregular, but she tried to keep herself under control so as not to wake Mike. Jason felt her tension and responded to her needs with caution and attention. Each of his movements was slow and confident, as if he knew exactly what she needed. She felt his fingers touch the most sensitive parts of her body, and her breathing became even more erratic. She tried to suppress a moan, biting her lip, but it only intensified her desire. She looked at Jason, his eyes full of passion and determination. There was no room for doubts or regrets in their minds. This moment was filled with passion and excitement that they both hadn't felt in a long time. Clara realized that this flight would change her relationship with Jason forever, and she was ready to accept it. Everyone on the plane was already asleep. The dim cabin lights created a cozy and intimate atmosphere. Mike was still sound asleep, leaning against the window. Clara and Jason continued talking, their conversations becoming increasingly personal and candid. Jason gently touched her knee, and Clara felt his fingers gradually sliding higher. She shivered at each touch, her breathing becoming more and more erratic. She glanced around, making sure no one noticed them. When his fingers reached her thigh, Clara felt her body responding to his touch. Jason discovered with surprise and pleasure how wet she was. This knowledge gave him a sense of power over her, and he felt his own arousal growing.
You're so wet.
He whispered in her ear, his voice full of desire. Clara barely held back a moan, her eyes pleading.
Please.
She whispered, breathing heavily.
Take me right here while my husband sleeps.
Jason looked at her with determination, his gaze stern and full of passion. He withdrew his finger from under her skirt and brought it to her lips.
Suck it,
he commanded. Clara obediently opened her mouth and began sucking his finger like a lollipop.
If you're a good girl, we'll go to the restroom and I'll punish you for soaking your panties.
Clara, aroused to the limit, nodded, her eyes gleaming with desire. She was ready to do anything he commanded. They stood up and quietly made their way to the restroom, careful not to wake Mike and avoid attracting the attention of other passengers. Once inside the restroom, Jason quickly closed the door and turned Clara to face the wall. He lifted her skirt, and she felt his hands roughly parting her legs. Under the hum of the plane, he entered her sharply, and Clara gasped with pleasure. This was exactly what she had dreamed of. He began moving inside her hard and unapologetically, as if she were his doll. His hands gripped her hips tightly, fully controlling her body. Sometimes he wrapped her long hair around his hand, adding to her sensations. Each of his movements sent waves of pleasure through her. Clara felt her body responding to his every touch, her thoughts fully focused on the moment. At one point, Jason pulled out of her and sat her on her knees. He ordered her to do to him what she had done to his finger, holding her by the nape. Clara began to obey his commands, her breathing heavy, but she tried to give him maximum pleasure. Jason enjoyed how hard it was for Clara to breathe in moments when she did her best. He slapped her face like a compliant doll, adding even more excitement to her sensations. Clara completely surrendered to Jason, following his every command, her thoughts fully focused on the moment. As they heard the flight attendant's announcement about the impending landing, Clara and Jason knew they had little time. Jason moved faster, his hand confidently guiding her head. At that moment, he filled Clara's mouth, and she obediently swallowed. They exited the restroom one by one, trying not to attract attention, as if nothing had happened. Clara returned to her seat next to Mike, who had just woken up. He stretched and looked at her with a smile.
Good morning, dear.
Mike said, his voice full of warmth and tenderness.
How do you feel?
Good, thank you.
Clara replied, trying to hide the excitement in her voice.
How did you sleep?
Great.
Mike answered, wrapping his arm around her shoulders.
I'm glad we'll have a chance to rest a bit in Tokyo before starting work.
Clara smiled, feeling her heart still racing from recent events. She glanced at Jason, who had already returned to his seat. Their eyes met, and Clara saw the same feelings in his eyes that were overwhelming her. But now, sitting next to her husband, she tried to focus on the upcoming tasks and not think about what had happened in the airplane restroom. The plane began to descend, and Clara felt a slight excitement from the approaching landing. Soon, they landed in Tokyo, and the passengers began preparing to disembark. Mike helped Clara with her luggage, and they headed towards the exit of the plane together.
Tokyo awaits us.
Mike said with a smile, looking at his wife.
It's going to be a wonderful trip.
After a long and exhausting flight, Clara and Mike finally arrived in Tokyo. After passing through passport control and collecting their luggage, they headed to the hotel to rest and prepare for the upcoming business meetings. The next morning, Clara learned that Mike and Jason had exchanged information about their hotels and discovered they were staying very close to each other. This news gave Clara mixed feelings. On one hand, she felt tense, but on the other, there was a sense of anticipation. After breakfast at the hotel, Mike suggested an evening walk around Tokyo, and Clara happily agreed. In the evening, they met in the hotel lobby and set off for a stroll through the evening city. Tokyo was full of lights and noise, every corner teeming with life and energy. They visited several famous landmarks, stopped by local cafes, and enjoyed the city's atmosphere. While they walked, Clara constantly felt Jason's presence somewhere nearby. His figure appeared here and there, and she knew their paths would cross. At one point, Mike got distracted by a conversation with a local guide, and Clara was left alone with Jason. He stood nearby, his gaze full of determination and desire. They understood each other without words. Jason gently touched her hand, and Clara felt a spark ignite in her heart. Jason leaned in and whispered in Clara's ear,
You look so beautiful tonight. I can't stop thinking about you.
Clara closed her eyes, enjoying his words and touch. They stood like that for several minutes, lost in their thoughts and feelings. Clara knew their connection was not accidental, and that many more amazing moments lay ahead. At that moment, Mike returned, and they continued their walk together. But Clara knew this evening had changed her relationship with Jason forever. After finishing their business meetings, Mike suggested celebrating their success, and they decided to go to a restaurant. Clara, Mike, and Jason chose a cozy spot in central Tokyo, known for its exquisite cuisine and pleasant atmosphere. The three of them sat at the table, ordered dishes and drinks. Jason and Mike got engrossed in discussing work and projects, while Clara, sitting between them, tried to focus on the conversation. However, her thoughts kept returning to the events on the plane and how Jason looked at her. Under the table, Jason began playing footsie with Clara. She felt his touches and immediately responded, trying not to reveal her excitement. Whenever possible, they exchanged glances filled with hidden desires. At one point, Clara deliberately dropped her fork.
Oops, sorry, I'll pick it up.
She said, bending down under the table. Under the table, she noticed how hard Jason was. Her hand instinctively slid over his pants in the zipper area, feeling his arousal. Jason barely held back a moan. Their eyes met under the table, and she returned to her seat, feeling her own excitement growing. They continued dinner, and Mike suspected nothing. After dinner, they took a walk through the evening Tokyo. The city was aglow with lights, and each step brought them new impressions. During the walk, Jason suggested stopping by his apartment for a cup of coffee. Mike happily agreed, and they headed to his place. Jason's apartment turned out to be spacious and modern. They spent some more time there, discussing plans and sharing stories. When Mike got tired and fell asleep on the couch, Clara was left alone with Jason. She hesitated for a long time, her thoughts torn between desire and duty. Finally, making up her mind, Clara put on only a thong and quietly approached Jason's bed. Without saying a word, she lay next to him, back turned, pushing her hips out and giving him control for the night. Jason understood her intentions and gently embraced her from behind, his hands sliding over her body, causing shivers of excitement. He covered her mouth with his hand to ensure Mike wouldn't hear anything, and entered her, controlling his movements by holding her hips. Clara looked out the window, admiring the night view of Tokyo. That evening was perfect for her in every way. She had long desired raw contact with a man like Jason. She was so wet again that Jason didn't have to hesitate long and took her roughly once more. His movements were confident and strong, fully controlling the situation. Clara felt her body responding to his every move, enjoying every moment. For her, it was not just physical pleasure, but the fulfillment of her deepest desires. With the first rays of sunlight streaming through the apartment windows, Clara woke up next to Jason. She quietly got up, trying not to wake him, and headed towards Mike, who was still asleep on the couch. Clara realized that her affair with Jason had been brief but intense and exciting. Nevertheless, she understood that she had to return to her real life and her relationship with her husband. The three of them returned to the hotel, packed their things, and headed to the airport. Clara tried to stay calm, though her emotions were raging inside her. The flight home felt endless, and her thoughts constantly returned to the events of the past few days. When the plane landed in their hometown, Clara felt both relief and sadness. She knew she had to leave everything that had happened in Tokyo behind and return to her usual life. Mike, unsuspecting, was happy to be back home and didn't notice her internal struggle. They returned to their cozy home, and Clara tried to get back into her routine. She resumed her daily activities, trying to forget about Jason and their forbidden affair. But every time she was alone, her thoughts would drift back to those moments of passion and intimacy. Mike, noticing changes in Clara's behavior, began to suspect something was wrong. He saw how she had become more withdrawn and pensive, and it troubled him.
Clara, did something happen?
He asked one evening as they sat in the kitchen.
You've changed since the trip. I feel like something's off.
Clara sighed and tried to smile.
Everything's fine, Mike. I'm just tired after all the traveling and work.
But Mike wasn't satisfied with her answer. He felt there was something behind her words.
You can talk to me, you know? I'm always here for you.
Clara knew Mike was right, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. She feared destroying their relationship and causing him pain. Instead, she tried to hide her feelings and continue living a normal life. Each day was filled with tension and anxiety. Clara tried to distract herself with work and household chores, but her thoughts kept returning to Jason. She felt guilty and torn between two worlds. Several weeks passed, and Clara realized she needed to make a choice. She couldn't continue living in a state of constant stress and lies. She needed to find a way to deal with her feelings and understand her desires. Several weeks had passed since Clara returned from Tokyo. She tried to get back to her normal life, but memories of Jason kept haunting her. Mike noticed changes in her behavior and began to suspect something was wrong. Clara decided to meet her best friend, Sarah, to share her feelings. They chose a cozy cafe where they always discussed everything. Clara knew she could trust Sarah, but it was still frightening to confess her betrayal. She began her story, nervously turning the cup in her hands. Clara told Sarah how she met Jason on the plane, how their relationship developed in Tokyo, and how she now felt guilty and torn. Sarah listened silently, her face serious and caring. Sarah gave her harsh but honest advice. Clara must confess to Mike. Lies would only make the situation worse, and if she truly wanted to save her relationship, she needed to be honest. Clara struggled with this advice, fearing it would destroy her relationship with Mike. She understood that the truth could change everything, but she also realized she could no longer live in a lie. In the following days, Clara continued to ponder Sarah's words. She knew she needed to make a tough decision and talk to Mike, despite the fear and possible consequences. A few days had passed since Clara talked to Sarah. Her internal conflict intensified, and Mike noticed that something was seriously bothering her. He decided not to delay the conversation and one evening asked her directly.
Clara, I see that you're hiding something. What's going on?
He asked, his voice full of concern and anxiety. Clara froze, feeling her heart tighten. She wasn't ready for this conversation, her fear and guilt preventing her from confessing. But she knew she could no longer hide the truth.
Mike, I need to tell you something.
She began quietly.
In Tokyo, I cheated on you with another man. It was wrong, and I'm very sorry for it.
Mike was silent for a long time, processing what he had heard. His face was tense, and Clara saw the pain and disappointment in his eyes. He suddenly flared up, and before Clara could react, he grabbed her wrists, leaving bruises. She saw his face contorted with anger, but he restrained himself from hitting her.
Why?
He finally said, his voice trembling with rage.
Why did you do this?
Clara tried to explain her feelings, but the words stuck in her throat.
I don't know, Mike. I love you, but I was missing passion, something I found in that affair. I'm not trying to justify myself. I just want to be honest with you.
Mike released her hands and turned away, struggling with his emotions.
I always thought we were honest with each other, that we could overcome any difficulties together. But this is a betrayal.
Clara felt tears streaming down her cheeks.
I'm so sorry. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth. I'm ready to accept any consequences.
Mike took a deep breath, his eyes full of pain but also a flicker of understanding.
I don't know if I can forgive this, Clara. We need time to figure out what to do next.
Those words gave Clara hope, but she quickly realized their relationship couldn't continue. Too much had been destroyed, and she understood she needed freedom and a fresh start. Clara and Mike made the difficult decision to part ways. It was painful, but necessary. Clara realized she needed time and space to sort herself out and start a new life. After the breakup, Clara felt free and carefree. She decided to focus on her career and personal growth. She began dedicating more time to her projects and hobbies, finding solace and strength in them. Gradually, she started forgiving herself for past mistakes and building her future on honesty and openness.